So as I said, welcome. My name is Daren White. We're going to be talking this afternoon about the buzz around tech and teaching, tenuous link. Huge thanks to Midjourney for the graphic work there, making me look half decent, and also Canva in the background doing the lovely imagery. When I was invited to be part of these presentations today, exploring limited possibilities, I was very excited by that because it's something that's very, very close to my heart. Big believer in 10x thinking and really thinking outside of the box and moving things forward. So to get us started, a recent poll across Europe found that 88% of teachers believe pupils are using AI to cheat. I don't believe that, but that's the belief, because as a teacher myself for 24 years, I know I'm pretty suspicious. I probably do err on the side of negativity when maybe I shouldn't. But 88% was the figure that was quoted. In reality, 2% of pupils cite using AI as their first source of information. Now again, I don't know how honest students are being about that, but it does give you a very interesting comparison between what teachers are thinking, what students are saying, and maybe about how well they understand the relationship with each other. But also the key thing here is that first point, that first source of information. They're not using it as the first source. They are trying other things first, which ethically says to me that they're trying to do the right things. In reality, 77% of pupils actually said they felt they needed more guidance around the ethics of using AI within their learning, whether that's for learning in general or whether that's for assessment. So 2% admit to it, 77% said they want more information and guidance on how to use it, because what they believe is that there should be more control, and they don't believe that they should be using AI to complete their assessments, which I think is really encouraging. So to give you a little bit of context, I work for Academies Enterprise Trust. We're one of the largest trusts in England. We've got 57 schools across England, ranging from the Isle of Wight in the south, right the way up to Middlesbrough in the north, the borders of Wales in the west, and Clacton and Tendring on the east coast. Huge differences in terms of geographical challenges, but also deprivation and things along those lines. We also have a mix of primary, secondary, and special schools. So a large trust with a big scale, and that presents problems geographically, which is why we've moved to a regional model where we have our central direction, but that is then interpreted and led by regional directors in each of the regions to provide that localism. Myself, as I said, I've been a teacher for 24 years. I was an MFL teacher, although I don't necessarily look, apparently, so I was told yesterday, like a stereotypical modern languages teacher. But Spanish is my first language. I also taught French and German. For about 10 years, I was a school leader. Those of you that have been in school leadership know that what tends to happen then is you get asked to teach whatever there's a gap with. So I tended to do less and less modern language teaching and more of other things. Got into ICT, digital skills, teaching maths, English. In fact, I think the only thing I've not taught is food technology, which is a real shame because I love cooking. But there are some real challenges that I encountered in my early career through using technology in MFL. That started right at the very beginning, rewinding tapes all of the time. Those of you that remember cassettes, my job before every teaching day would be to find the right point on the cassette for the recording that I was going to play to the students in class on a tiny little Kuma machine, and make sure it was in the right place. And if I was going to use that for more than one lesson, making sure that I had the time in between to rewind it again and find that space a second time. So there were some huge challenges from that point of view. For many years, there still are 4 skills within modern foreign languages: speaking, listening, reading, writing. And for a long time, you had a choice of tier, higher or foundation, in terms of what students were to be entered at for their GCSE. For a long time, that was a joint conversation between the teacher and the student, and that was a really valuable conversation, and you could pick and choose. So if a student was particularly strong in listening, you could enter them for higher tier for listening, but if they weren't so strong with their speaking, you could enter them for foundation tier for their speaking. They could still achieve really impressive results. Not so long ago, that was taken away, and that option was removed, so you couldn't any longer opt for a mixing of tiers between the different skills, basically meaning everybody had to be at the same level in all 4 skills. And we know that's not the case. In some cases, I had students who were elective mutes who were expected to conduct speaking exams, which for me just seems ridiculous. So that was a real challenge. It was a challenge in terms of assessing, trying to get round a class and listening to 32 people speaking and being able to give them realistic live feedback on the quality of their language, their accent, how they'd interacted with each other. Peer assessment was difficult because if the students were peer assessing each other and they used language that the other one didn't know, they couldn't realistically peer assess them, so they didn't know how well they'd communicated. Recording was a challenge. As I said, it started out with cassettes. Then it moved to burning DVDs and CDs. Obviously, technology has moved things on. And then around about 2006, Google Translate started challenging me, shall we say, to teach children how to use tools appropriately. It's something I always worked on with dictionaries, so bilingual dictionaries and how to use them. And it was something that rapidly became a skill that was massively needed. Because Year 7 would come in with great aspirations. They'd want to communicate really well in the language. They'd go straight on to Google Translate for their homework. I would then speak to them in class and say, well done for using Google Translate. And they would just look at me in complete innocence and say, I never. And I would say, well, you absolutely did, because the number of times I had homework handed in where pupils had attended a football match, but it was the kind that you use to light your cigarettes. People that had talked about taking a break, which actually converted into lots of cars rolling down hills because they'd had their handbrakes removed, because their own spelling provided a barrier. They didn't put the right spelling into Google Translate, they didn't get the right answer out. If they didn't provide the context of their use of the word in Google Translate, they got a completely different answer out. But that was no different to teaching them how to use a dictionary. If they didn't use the dictionary effectively, they didn't get the right output. I lost count of the number of times I marked GCSE coursework where the students are meant to say the word it and had actually written prom because they'd looked in the dictionary and where it obviously alongside it just says prom, short for pronoun, and they'd taken that as being the word that they should be using. So they were real challenges. And that got me thinking about value and validity. And obviously this is an authentic photo. Absolutely happened. And that trust around that. Coming back to that figure, around 88% of teachers feeling like pupils are using AI to cheat. What do we consider to be valid? What do we consider to be authentic? And I think that's a question we've got to continue to ask ourselves. So in the 1980s and 90s, when I was that young chap heading off to school, I would go off to the library to do my homework, and I would pick up some books, and I would read the blurb at the back, probably, flick through a few pages, grab some bits that I thought were useful, quote those in my homework. When I was very young, I probably didn't cite them at all. When I got to GCSE, maybe a little bit more. But that was accepted as my homework. And there was no question around authenticity then. And my question to all of us really is, well, if me going to the library, a source of information, finding some information and interpreting that in my own way and then using that in my own work, if that was okay in the 1980s and the 90s, is that really any different to using AI now as a starting point? Is it really any less authentic? And again, it's a question for us to be considering. I don't pretend to have the answers. But one of the things I like to focus on with my students and with staff when I'm talking about using AI, I use the boost approach with my colleagues and with my students. And that's about boosting performance and enhancing your performance using AI. So the B of that is about being balanced. Is your use of AI balanced? When you're creating a prompt, are you bias aware when you're creating that prompt? Are you thinking about whether any of your unconscious biases are being built into that prompt? Because that will affect the output. But also, once you've got your output, are you reviewing that for potential bias as well? I'm then really open always about my use of AI. So as I said, I used Midjourney for a lot of the images. I used Canva for the presentation, and Canva has a great tool within Magic Studio that will generate presentations for you. That's always now my starting point. I don't start with a blank slide deck. I start with a generated slide deck and work from there. I work on the 80-20 rule. I let the AI and the technology do 80% of the heavy lifting, and then the 20% that's authentically me does that final yardage that makes it about what I'm talking about, makes it particularly relevant to me and the situation that I'm in, whether that's the audience, whether that's the geographical situation, whatever it might be, but being very open about it. Taking ownership as well, really important. I have heard and seen examples of people basically putting their hands up and saying, look, I used AI to write that email. It may have offended you, but hey, I didn't write it. AI did. And whilst that's lovely to be able to try and pass the buck on to somebody else, ultimately, we take ownership of what we use. So if we could use AI to create resources, text, summaries, emails, letters, policies, whatever it may be, we've got to take ownership of that and make sure that we review it both for bias, but also for accuracy and validity. Then, obviously, security, making sure that we're not providing personal data into those databases and training the large language models, making sure that we're securely using that. Absolutely fine to anonymize data, but not to be uploading class reports and asking that to be analyzed for us. Anonymize it, and it's a different matter. So thinking always about our security aspect. And then finally, with the boost, is about time. And there's a lot that's said about AI being used to reduce workload and to improve the amount of time people have available. But equally, you can end up going down a rabbit hole and spending a lot of time playing around with AI without any real benefit other than maybe having a bit of fun. I love, as you could probably guess, playing around with Midjourney. But I do that in my own time because I enjoy it as a hobby, if you like. It's not something I would do particularly within work. So I think it's very important to bear in mind that use of AI could easily become a gimmick that you use for the sake of using it. And where does that fall within the pedagogical approach and the ethical approach and your workload in terms of, is it really saving me time? Is it really saving the students time? Is it boosting our performance? Or is it providing a distraction that we could maybe do without? So that boost approach is one that I use with all of my colleagues. And that really leads us on to how AI then might move things forward in the future. We're talking about exploring limitless possibilities. How might AI enable more adaptive learning? One of those things is we might be looking at much more personalized learning paths. We could be looking at situations where instead of a class of 30 students all following the same curriculum and all following the same resources, actually have a fully personalized experience based on their previous performance, their own tendencies, and their own responses to questions and challenges that they've faced already. It might also enable us to provide instant feedback for students. That's already there in some cases, but I think there's a lot can be done in terms of speeding that feedback process up. So providing that instant feedback for students to be able to make a difference straight away. And then the third, predictive analysis. Actually, how could the AI be leveraged to help us as teachers make better decisions around the resources we produce, the approaches we take with our students, because we already understand the students in our class and how they might react to certain approaches. And that predictive analysis saying to us as teachers, for example, okay, you've prepared this, but this student might struggle with that. They may need a differentiated approach. They might need a slightly different interface. They might not cope with a written response, but an audio response might be more appropriate for them. So how that might build into our planning as well. And then resource optimization along with that, making the most of the resources we've got available, and also collaboratively working to make sure we're not reinventing the wheel. So taking resources that are already there and uplifting them, again, using that 80-20 rule, let the AI do 80% of that uplifting to really boost the content and the engagement level with the 20% of our original authentic input. This leads us nicely on to digital assessment and what that might look like. And we're currently in 2024. Moving forward, looking ahead, what might that look like into the future? This particular quote was from a former GCSE principal examiner who was worried about the onset of digital examinations because they didn't feel that it would be equitable for young people. I'd question that quote. If anybody's ever seen like kids texting under the table with their phones, they're very, very aware of a QWERTY keyboard. It might be a lot smaller than the one I deal with, and they could probably see it a lot better, but they don't even need to look. They're texting away without even looking, and they're absolutely really agile with it. But my concern around this kind of quote is actually, what is the thinking in the person's head is that digital assessment means a keyboard and a screen. And it doesn't have to mean that, but that's the initial kind of instinct. So if we think about the SAMR model, where are we at the moment with AQA, Pearson, OCR starting to think about digital examinations by possibly 2030 in English? How optimistic is that? How adventurous is that? Is that really exploring limitless possibilities, or is that a little bit reticent and a little bit resistant? Because I would argue that if we're just going to take exam assessment online and make it a drop-down quiz or an option to select the right answer, drag and drop, really that is nothing more than substitution. We're just taking the same experiences the students have got on paper and making it digital. And in some cases, it's not even as good as the experience on paper because it might be clunky. With the exam boards as well, many of them are looking at their own digital platforms. My concern around that is, might you as a student sit one exam in the morning on one platform, go to a separate exam in the afternoon, and sit a different exam on a different platform with a different user interface, different icons. And I think, the onus is on JCQ to really put into place those guardrails to make sure that students get an equitable experience. So rather than a buzz, it's more of a woody, really. It's not that much in terms of innovation and really 10x thinking. So I always like to approach things from a how might we question point of view. How might we design a robust and equitable digital assessment system? Again, I don't pretend to have the answers, but I think it's something we all need to be thinking about. Might that be live face-to-face interviews? If we're worried about students cheating using AI, might the AI free up enough time and capacity for us to actually be able to interview students face-to-face? But those students that struggle to get their answers down on paper, I'm not suggesting it should be necessary for everybody, but for those students that we all know who, when you speak to them, can really eloquently illustrate an example, a problem, a solution, but maybe struggle to put that on paper, why shouldn't we be able to evidence a live face-to-face interview? And the AI might free up the time for us to do that. Peer assessment and group work. Coming back to my work as a language teacher. Actually, if you're in a situation where you've got 5 or 6 students working collaboratively, if the technology can tell you exactly who contributed what to that piece of work, then you don't have to worry about group work being an issue when it comes to assessment. It becomes a very viable option because you can be sure that the students have put in a certain amount of work and this has been their particular role in putting that work together. So it opens up some opportunities and some further questions. And again, personalized assessment, giving pupils that opportunity to assess or to be assessed in a way that suits them. So if I'm not a student who's very good with writing, but I'm very good with speaking, why shouldn't I be able to record my responses? If I'm a student who's very good from a listening perspective, absolutely fine for me to be able to kind of sit and listen to something, but then I might struggle to write it down. Could I record a video that explains my understanding, gives my answer, and shows my application of the knowledge in a completely different way that's suitable for me? And I think that's something we need to explore, because that's kind of gone away. Like I said, when I was a language teacher, all of my students used to have to record a cassette of them speaking, and then I'd take them all home and listen to them. And it was cumbersome and it was difficult, but it was them and it was authentic. And they were quite confident in doing it once they'd done it a couple of times. With the technology we've got available now, with the click of a button, they can record audio, they can record video, and we can be confident that it is authentically them. So my question really is what will digital technology and digital assessment look like 10 years from now? And what action will you take in order to make that happen? As Theodore Roosevelt said, nothing worth having comes easy. I'm a big believer in that. It can be a struggle. Sometimes there's an initial struggle, but then a massive win at the end of it. So don't be afraid to hit those challenges head on. And finally, really just from me, if you'd like to continue the conversation, feel free to connect with me online. More than happy to have conversations. Email, social media, however you like. Let's continue the conversation because together we can come up with better solutions. Thank you.